Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive where we're going to be talking all about emotional boundaries.
Yeah.
We've got a great podcast episode to unpack with you all, and I think it's really going to help us understand just how important those boundaries are.
Right.
Not just for, healthy relationships,
Yeah,
but for, our own personal sense of well-being.
exactly.
So, instead of always thinking about these boundaries as these like harsh walls that shut people out,
Yeah.
what if we imagine them more as like a beautiful garden fence?
Oh, I love that analogy. A fence isn't there to keep everything out. It's there to protect what's growing inside.
Right.
And when it comes to our emotional well-being, those boundaries, they really do act as that safeguard, against burnout and resentment and just those messy relationship dynamics we all want to try and avoid.
For sure. For sure. So we're really talking about, tending to our own emotional gardens here.
Exactly.
So in this podcast episode, what are they actually saying about what emotional boundaries actually are?
Well, they define them as those invisible lines that we establish to define what's acceptable and unacceptable in our interactions.
Okay.
It's like setting those clear expectations about how we want to be treated, what we're willing to tolerate, and, most importantly, what we absolutely won't.
No. So it's all about communicating our needs and protecting our mental and emotional space.
Absolutely.
I know we've all had those moments where we've felt pressured to do something we just really didn't want to do, maybe just to avoid conflict or, please someone else.
Yeah,
Is that a classic example of a boundary being crossed?
absolutely. That's a great example. And the episode goes on to explain that a lack of boundaries can leave us feeling drained and resentful and even sometimes taken advantage of.
Yeah.
And, it can lead to a buildup of stress and negativity that can really impact our overall well-being.
So it's not even just about avoiding conflict in the moment. It's about preventing long-term emotional damage.
Yeah.
Now, the episode mentions different types of boundaries,
Yeah.
not just this general sense of needing them, but specific categories.
Right.
Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, they break down boundaries into emotional time, physical, mental, and even material boundaries,
Wow.
each one playing a unique role in safeguarding different aspects of our lives.
Okay. I am intrigued. I want to know more about this.
Yeah.
So what exactly do those different types of boundaries look like, and why should our listeners care about each of them?
Well, let's start with emotional boundaries.
Okay.
These are about protecting your feelings and emotional energy.
Okay.
It's about being selective about who you share your personal thoughts and feelings with,
Mhm.
and not feeling obligated to absorb the emotional baggage of others.
So it's about recognizing that you don't have to be everyone's therapist or emotional dumping ground.
Exactly.
You have the right to choose who you let into that inner circle of emotional vulnerability.
Right.
Okay, now what about time boundaries?
Yeah.
We hear so much about work-life balance these days,
Yeah.
but it sounds like there's more to it than that.
There is time boundaries are about respecting your own time and energy.
Okay.
It's about setting limits on how much you're willing to give to others and prioritizing your own needs and goals.
Mm-hmm.
It's being able to say no to things that drain you, even if it means disappointing someone else.
So it's not selfish to want to protect your time and energy.
Not at all.
Right.
In fact, it's essential for maintaining your own well-being.
Okay.
Think about it this way. If you're constantly overextending yourself for others, you'll eventually run out of steam to pursue your own passions, spend time with loved ones, or simply relax and recharge.
That makes a lot of sense. Protecting your time allows you to show up more fully in other areas of your life.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got emotional boundaries, time boundaries. What about physical boundaries?
Yeah, physical boundaries are about respecting your personal space and physical comfort.
Okay.
It's about setting limits on physical touch proximity and even how others treat your belongings.
So if someone's always invading your personal space or
Yeah.
touching you without consent,
Right.
that's a violation of a physical boundary.
Right. Exactly. And this can apply to all sorts of situations, from crowded public transportation to unwanted advances. It's about feeling safe and comfortable in your own body.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these different types of boundaries are all interconnected. Now, what about mental boundaries?
Yeah.
I'm curious about how those differ from emotional boundaries.
Mental boundaries are about protecting your thoughts, beliefs, and values.
Oh.
It's about being able to disagree with others without feeling pressured to conform or change your perspective.
So it's about having the freedom to think for yourself and not feeling obligated to adopt someone else's opinions just to please them.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that everyone has their own unique perspective and respecting those differences, even if you don't agree with them.
That's an important point, especially in today's world where there's so much pressure to conform to certain ideologies.
Right.
And finally, what about material boundaries?
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure I fully grasped that one.
Material boundaries are about setting limits on what you're willing to share or lend. It's about being mindful of your financial resources, your possessions, and even your time and energy when it comes to helping others.
So if someone's always asking to borrow money or taking advantage of your generosity,
Yeah,
that's a sign that you might need to set some stronger material boundaries.
exactly. It's about recognizing that you have the right to say no without feeling guilty or obligated. And it's about protecting your own financial stability and well-being.
It seems like understanding these different types of boundaries can really empower us to take control of our lives and relationships.
Yeah,
But how do we know if we actually need stronger boundaries in the first place?
that's a great question.
What are some signs that we can look out for?
Well, the podcast episode actually highlights some very relatable signs.
Okay.
For instance, do you often find yourself feeling resentful after doing things for others? Like
Yeah.
you've gone above and beyond, but your efforts weren't appreciated or reciprocated?
I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
That feeling of being taken for granted can really sting.
Exactly. And that resentment is often a sign that our boundaries have been crossed. Another sign to watch out for is difficulty saying no without feeling guilty.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find yourself constantly agreeing to things you don't really want to do just to avoid letting someone down or causing conflict?
Oh, that's definitely me. I'm such a
Yeah.
people pleaser. I hate saying no to anyone,
Right.
but I'm starting to realize that it often leaves me feeling overwhelmed and exhausted.
That's a common struggle. But remember, saying no is not selfish.
Okay.
It's simply a way of honoring your own needs and limits. And if you're constantly putting others' needs ahead of your own, it's a sign that you might need to strengthen those boundaries.
So resentment and difficulty saying no are two big red flags.
Yeah.
What else should our listener be paying attention to?
The episode also mentions feeling constantly drained by other people's drama.
Okay.
Were you often the one people turn to for emotional support, but you rarely feel like you get that same support in return?
That's a great point. It's like being an emotional sponge, constantly absorbing other people's negativity without having an outlet to process your own emotions.
Exactly, and that can be incredibly draining both mentally and emotionally. If you find yourself constantly feeling exhausted by other people's problems, it might be a sign that you need to create some distance and prioritize your own well-being.
So awareness of these signs is a crucial first step.
Absolutely.
But once we recognize that we need stronger boundaries, how do we actually go about setting them? Where do we even begin?
The episode offers some really practical advice on that. First and foremost, it emphasizes the importance of self-reflection.
Okay.
Before you can set boundaries with others, you need to get clear on your own needs and limits. What makes you feel safe and respected? What are you willing to tolerate? And what are your absolute deal breakers?
So it's about taking some time to really check in with ourselves and figure out what we need in order to feel emotionally healthy and balanced.
Right. It's about understanding your own values, priorities, and limits. Once you have a better sense of those, you can start communicating them to others.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But communication can be tricky. How do we assert our boundaries without coming across as aggressive or hurtful?
The episode suggests using I statements as a way to communicate your needs clearly and calmly. Instead of saying, you're always doing this or you can't do that,
Right.
try phrasing it as, I feel uncomfortable when, or I need some space to.
So it's about taking ownership of our feelings and needs and expressing them in a way that's assertive but not accusatory.
Exactly. It's about focusing on how you feel and what you need rather than blaming or attacking the other person.
That's a really helpful tip. I think sometimes we shy away from setting boundaries because we're afraid of confrontation or hurting someone's feelings.
Yeah.
But this approach seems much more gentle and respectful.
It is. And remember, setting boundaries is not about controlling other people's behavior.
Right.
It's about taking responsibility for your own well-being and communicating your needs in a clear and assertive way.
Okay, so self-reflection and clear communication are key.
Uh-huh.
But the episode also acknowledges that setting boundaries isn't always easy, right?
Absolutely.
What about those situations where people push back or try to test our limits?
Absolutely. Not everyone is going to be receptive to our boundaries, especially if they're used to having things their way. And that's where things can get really tricky. It's kind of like tending to that garden we were talking about earlier.
I like that analogy.
Imagine someone trying to plant something invasive in your carefully cultivated space. You wouldn't hesitate to say no and protect your plants, right?
Right.
It's about protecting what's precious to you. And sometimes that means having those tough conversations and standing your ground even when it's uncomfortable.
So how do we handle that pushback in a way that's both firm and respectful?
Mm-hmm.
Because I can imagine it's easy to get flustered or defensive when someone's challenging our boundaries.
The episode emphasizes the importance of staying calm and reiterating your needs. Don't get pulled into an argument or try to justify your boundaries. Simply state them clearly and calmly, and if the other person continues to push back, you might need to disengage from the conversation or even distance yourself from the situation altogether.
Wow, that sounds really tough, especially if it's someone we care about.
It can be challenging,
Yeah.
but remember, you have the right to protect your own well being, even if it means creating some distance from people who aren't respecting your boundaries.
So it's not about being mean or cutting people off, but about prioritizing our own emotional health and creating healthy boundaries in our relationships.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that healthy relationships are built on mutual respect and a willingness to honor each other's needs and limits.
This is all so insightful. I feel like I'm starting to see boundaries in a whole new light.
Mm.
It's not about shutting people out, but about creating healthy and fulfilling relationships.
I'm glad to hear that. And I think it's important to remember that setting boundaries is an ongoing process. It's not a one-time thing. You might need to adjust your boundaries over time as your needs and circumstances change.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
It's about being flexible and adaptable and constantly checking in with ourselves to make sure our boundaries are still serving us well.
Right. It's like tending to that garden. You wouldn't just plant your seeds and then walk away. You'd need to weed, water, and prune regularly to ensure your plants are thriving.
I love how you keep bringing it back to that analogy. It's so helpful.
Yeah.
So we've talked about recognizing the signs that we need stronger boundaries, the importance of self-reflection and communication, and how to handle pushback. But what about the emotional side of things?
Yes, that's a crucial part of the equation. It's one thing to understand the concept of boundaries intellectually, but it's another thing to actually put them into practice, especially when it involves challenging those old patterns and beliefs that might be holding us back.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Like if we're used to people-pleasing or putting others' needs before our own, it can feel really uncomfortable to start asserting our boundaries.
Mhm. Yeah, it can feel almost wrong to prioritize ourselves, especially if we've been conditioned to believe that putting ourselves first is selfish.
Absolutely. It's true. Many of us, we're taught to be agreeable, right?
Mhm.
We avoid conflict and we prioritize others' needs above our own. But, this episode really flips that script.
Right.
And it highlights how setting boundaries is actually a form of self-respect and self-love.
That is a really powerful reframing.
Yeah.
Instead of seeing boundaries as selfish, we can view them as essential for our own emotional well-being and for, cultivating healthier relationships with others.
Absolutely. And, think about it. When we feel good about ourselves
Right.
and, when our needs are met,
Uh-huh.
we're actually able to show up more authentically and generously in our relationships.
Mhm.
We're not depleted or resentful,
Yeah.
so we can give freely from a place of abundance. That makes a lot of sense. It's like filling our own cups first so that we have something to pour from.
Exactly. Now, the episode also acknowledges that people might resist our newfound boundaries,
Right.
especially those who benefited from us not having them before.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
So how do we deal with that pushback without, getting discouraged or giving in?
Yeah, the key is to stay calm
Okay.
and reiterate your needs firmly but kindly. Remember, you don't have to justify your boundaries to anyone. Simply state them clearly and confidently, and if the other person continues to push, you might need to disengage from the conversation or even create some distance.
That could be tough, especially if it's someone we care about.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it's crucial to prioritize our own well-being, even if it means disappointing others.
You got it. And remember, setting boundaries is an ongoing process. It's not about achieving perfection overnight. It's about making small, consistent efforts to honor your needs and limits.
So it's like building a muscle. The more we practice setting boundaries, the stronger and more confident we become.
Exactly. It takes time and practice, but the rewards are well worth the effort. You'll find that as you become more comfortable setting boundaries, your relationships will actually become stronger and more fulfilling because they'll be based on mutual respect and a deeper understanding of each other's needs.
That's so encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into emotional boundaries, what's one key takeaway you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, if you're feeling overwhelmed, resentful, or constantly drained in your relationships, it might be time to examine your boundaries. Think about one small boundary you can set this week. Maybe it's saying no to an extra commitment, carving out some time for yourself each day, or simply being more mindful of who you share your personal thoughts and feelings with.
Okay.
Remember, even those small steps can make a big difference in your overall well-being.
It's like tending to that emotional garden we talked about. It might feel daunting at first, but with a little care and attention, we can cultivate a space that feels safe, nurturing and full of life.
Beautifully said. It's about creating a space where you can thrive and connect with others in a way that feels authentic and fulfilling.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into emotional boundaries. We hope you found it insightful and empowering. Remember, setting boundaries is an act of self-love, not selfishness, and it's a journey, not a destination. So be patient with yourself, celebrate those small victories, and keep tending to that beautiful emotional garden of yours.
Until next time, remember that you deserve to feel safe, respected, and empowered in your relationships, and boundaries are the key to unlocking that freedom.